ask me and I'll let you know how it maps. Black etiquette, you can find it in Canvas. We've only ever had like minor problems, but don't overuse the general channel. Definitely post stuff, especially if it's just amusing, but don't like mention like at channel so everyone gets a notification at like 2 a.m. because you found a funny article about Elon Musk. Like, don't do that. And if you start to do that, trust that I will tell you, like, no more messages like that, please. I will give you that feedback. That's what the space is for. Okay, so I'm gonna go through a little lecture, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then we're going to take a break before we do an activity. So I just wanted to catch everybody up, make sure everybody's on the same page about what happens out in the world. And then once we do our activity, we're going to talk about like what is UX and how does it fit into everything. So some of you have heard a version of this before, but let it just be a refresher and feel really good if you already know this content a little bit. So we want to go through the product development process. Product is a term used in tech to describe any digital experience. So a mobile app is a product. A website can be a product. And we use this term really generally and confusingly. So that's something to be aware of. But product development or the creation of these digital experiences, sometimes they're also physical experiences. Like there's a hardware component that talks to an app, right? That'd be sort of like hardware and software experiences or application experiences. All of these things are products. So the product development process is the process by which we create any of these things. And generally speaking, it follows what's called the double diamond. In UX, in user experience, you'll come across the double diamond. It's the first thing just about everybody learns related to UX. And it's the stages of the product development life cycle or the product development process. So the idea is you first discover, then define, then you develop, and you deliver. And it's a diamond because there's this concept of like divergent thinking and then convergent thinking. So generating ideas and then narrowing those ideas down. And that's why it kind of does this diamond effect. This double diamond was originated in like 2004, 2005, long ago. And I think it was like some council, some design council or something that put this out. And it's just become sort of the basic doctrine for a lot of UX things. The idea here is that you discover or gather insight about a problem. Oh, I guess I should mention the first diamond. Wow, cool circle. The first diamond is often called the problem space, and the second diamond is often called the solution space. And space being like headspace or stage of a project. So we want to define the problem. And then we want to define the solution. We don't want to start with a solution. We want to start with a human problem and then find a solution that meets the needs of that problem. So discover and define are in the problem space. This is where you explore and you gather insights about the problem. You uncover opportunities about the problem, usually through data. And that often looks like interviewing users or collecting data from potential humans who may be engaging with your product or digital experience. So you generate all of these, what's going on in the world, this concept of what's going on in the world. Then the define phase is getting really narrow about the problem. So we might find that the problem in the world is that many people who want cats can't have cats because they're allergic or they're in an apartment or something, right? This is a painful problem that exists in the world, and we could explore all the nuances around that problem. Why people feel they can't have cats, or what's preventing people who want cats from interacting with cats. Then we might say, okay, we define that problem as there are people who want to interact with cats who can't for some situational reason. And we want to be able to solve that problem. So some ways, some solutions, now we'd move from the problem space into the solution space. Some solutions for that problem could look like cat cafes, fostering cats, having a friend who has a cat. Lots of different solutions to that problem I just described. So in the solution space, we develop whatever that potential solution could be, and then we build it and deliver, and we test that solution. So if it's cat cafes, let's say that none of us had ever heard of a cat cafe. It was a brand new idea. It's like, this is kind of crazy. This is an idea that we have. Now we need to go kind of develop that idea and deliver it and see if it works. See if anyone actually wants to go to a cat cafe. So this space, this double diamond framework is important because in discourse, we're going to be mostly in the solution space. We're going to be mostly in the second diamond. But in our interaction design, which is abbreviated IXD, in our interaction design, we may kind of be in like late stages of the problem phase, but the majority of things is like, I'm going to come at you with a defined problem and you're going to design a solution for that problem, or you're going to test existing solutions to see if they're actually meeting the needs of the people who have the problem. I have another course called UX Strategy, UX Design and Strategy, that's very much just in the first diamond. Some of you have already taken that class. So there's going to be a switch to now we are thinking about solutions and really refining and optimizing solutions. Questions, comments, thoughts, feelings about the double diamond. How many of you have seen double diamond before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Okay. So in the workplace, how this actually operates, how we move through the process that is the double diamond, is there are these different roles on a typical team. So if you're a really, really tiny startup, sometimes these roles break down. And if you're at a huge, huge enterprise business, sometimes there are tons of people in a single role. But I wanted to give you this concept of the roles that exist on a team. So we have a product manager, we have a product designer, or sometimes called a UX designer. We have a UX researcher, sometimes called a product researcher, usually called a UX researcher. And then we have a UI or a visual designer. These are some of our key players on a product development team. These are the people who create or come up with what the problem is and what the solution should be. And then we have all of our software engineers, often abbreviated as SWE, pronounced SWE, but you'll also see Eng or devs, all the developers. So you have some kind of team lead, and then you have the people working on the front end of the technical solution, the back end of the solution, and then sometimes you have like testers or people who are helping get that solution out into the world. So we have problem space and solution design, and then we have the folks who have to make that solution a reality. And there's this natural tension and negotiation that happens where product and UX people have big ideas, and then they talk to their technical counterparts, and the technical counterparts are like, guess what? That's not possible. Or guess what? That's going to take 3 years of development time. And that's part of the relationship that naturally happens, and it can be actually really great and productive. It's really common practice. You notice I cut some people in half. It's really common practice in a typical tech organization, but even outside of tech, to have teams organized this way. So these are called cross-functional teams. You'll have a product manager, a PM, a product manager, a designer, a researcher, and some tech folks. And they're all going to be on one area of the experience. So if we work for Amazon, we could have a cross-functional team whose entire job is just the homepage, just the login flow, just the how you search for a product on Amazon. And each one of these teams is just in their space. So that I have 2 here, but imagine Amazon probably has 95 of these, maybe more than that. At a small, medium organization, you could have like 6 of these teams. And what's interesting about this is all of these people actually report to their own manager. So product managers across all the teams report to the head of product. That's their manager. The UX people typically report to the head of UX or the head of design. Sometimes there's a research manager that's separate, depends on the size of the organization. And then all the technical people report to the head of technology, the CTO, the VP of engineering, the director of, etc. So they report to their own technical manager. And this is just an interesting thing to be aware of. When you enter into the workspace, you're going to find this pattern. So these people work together. If they're on site, they often sit together in their cross-functional teams. But at the end of the day, they actually report to different managers. And this is because we want this like beautiful tension between the product manager should be coming from the place of, is this solution valuable? Is this going to kind of from the business perspective, is this going to work? Is this going to work for the business? The UX professionals are often from the user perspective or from the person using or adopting the solution, the customer. So they're coming and advocating for that perspective. And then the technical folks are all about feasibility, real world, can we do it? How long does it take? How many of you have seen this, have experience with this? 3, maybe 4 of you. Okay, great. And I have just a little bit of the role breakdown here. It's really common in product and UX for like, maybe you start off as a designer and then you become a researcher, or maybe you start off as a researcher and then you become a product manager, or you start off as, there's a lot of interchangeability among these roles. And I give that information to you now because I guess as you're navigating these waters, if you find that you like certain tasks and you're not really seeing how that maps to product designer or UX researcher, you might find that you're actually more inclined for one of these roles than the other. Or you might start off as one, work 2 years as that role, and then realize like, oh, I'm actually more into being a product manager. So I'm going to go do that now. And that's very common, and those pathways are really easy to navigate. And they sort of map to the double diamond a little bit. So the product manager is very much like, what is the problem to solve? Usually the researcher is involved in that too. When it comes to generating, ideating, what's required to solve the problem, sometimes the designer gets involved in that, but that's usually driven by the product manager and the researcher. Then what are the potential solutions? Cat cafe, rent a cat service, have a friend who has a cat, all of those solutions. That's when the designer usually comes in and leads that. How could we solve the problem? And then engineers come in and talk about like, okay, given that that is the best solution to this problem, how do we negotiate a reality that actually works, that's feasible, that can become real in some way? Double diamond. The other thing, oh, Hannah, do you have a thought?
Yeah, actually, can you go back to the double diamond, the slide
Sure.
previous? This double diamond kind of reminds me of like the product, the SDLC, the product development lifecycle.
Yeah.
Instead of it being a diamond, I recognize it as like a circle instead because it's like always, yeah, never mind.
You are 2 slides ahead, my friend. So has anyone seen this besides Hannah, or something like this? Some like circle within circle biz? Yeah, this is how most of us, to Hannah's point, this is how most of us like to think about product development, rather than the double diamond being this linear thing we move through. In reality, it feels so cyclical, and it feels like you take 1 step forward and 1 step back and 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, and you go back and forth a lot. So I'm really glad you bring this up. I threw this in here just as like a, hey, you'll see it this way. The double diamond is the starting place, and then your sort of understanding of this process gets more refined. And there are camps, as you imagine, like folks who love this particular diagram that I'm showing you, and other folks who love other circle things, and you'll see them all over the place when describing the product development process. Did you have any other thoughts on this, Hannah?
No, I think this kind of sums up everything I was going to, I guess, comment on.
Yes. I'm glad you recognized that these 2 things are the same but different, right? One other thing I want you all to be aware of is there are different specializations within UX. So you'll see UX researcher, UX designer, UX writer, UX strategist, and of course, like UX manager. So I'm just letting you know that if you're ever searching for job titles, you might find all of these, and one of these might really spark joy within you. Like you may love just the writing. Like, how do we write good content that actually serves the people who are consuming that content? And so you might actually want to be like a UX writer instead of a UX designer or a UX researcher. So anyone who's worked in this space is right there with you. How often do you think you actually come into a company? This is one of the criticisms of the double diamond at all, is how often do you think you come into a company like, hello, welcome to Netflix, your first day as a UX researcher or something. And they're just going to say, okay, well, go find the problem to solve and then go create whatever you need to create to solve the problem. Like, that's not really how it works. You usually show up, you join one of those cross-functional teams. Maybe their space is the like discover or something. Like, I'm thinking on Netflix or any streaming service, when you jump into the platform, the first thing you see is like those top recommended things for you. So how those are displayed, maybe that's all the team works on. And it's not like the solution, I mean, the solution already exists. You're just refining little things about it. It's really common to not get to start in the true problem space for most things. Even in startups, you're usually joining because there's a founder or like some entrepreneurial person who has an idea, and that idea is usually a solution, not a problem. It's usually like, I want to build an app that does this thing, right? And then it's actually researchers who have to pull them back into the problem space. Like, well, what is the problem in the world you're trying to solve? And how will your solution meet that problem? And is that problem even very prevalent out there in the world? Or is it just kind of like a you thing? Yep. Thanks for bringing that up. It's a mature thought to have, like, that this isn't the way it works. And I think that's why people kind of like the circles within circles, because it feels very like chaos and circular, boots on the ground.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because in the beginning, this circle, I saw it for the first time and it didn't really make any sense to me. But when you and Serena talked about this process, it kind of does now.
Yes. So like this little circle of like, and then we experiment, and then sometimes we find out that we're building the wrong thing, like we have the wrong idea of what the problem is. I can't tell you how often like someone in leadership will decide like, I think customers hate that. You should go figure that out. Go figure out whether customers hate the thing I hate. And then you go to customer and do that. And many, many people I know are living proof you can do that. There's a great book, like you all have time to read. Gosh, no. Do your like bed rotting and stuff. I support you. But there is a great book if you want to read it one day. It's called Range, I-N-G, Range. And it's about people who are generalists and the strengths of being a generalist. So if you ever want a pep talk, if you're like a Renaissance person, or like jack of all trades, right? Or someone who kind of does everything and likes to be doing lots of different types of activities. A good indicator, I don't mean to point fingers, but a good indicator is like if you have a double major or a major and a minor and they're like complete opposite things, right? Or like some of your projects are that like scientific and some of your projects are like something else. So those are indicators that you may be more of a generalist versus a specialist. And that's just something to know about yourself. A t-shirt and give it to me, and then I'm gonna like walk around going, oh, should I have said that in class that day? Great. Well, the other thing I will say is when it comes to these actual roles like designer, product manager, and researcher, depending on the organization, they are such a Venn diagram. Like, and especially the smaller you go, the more this area overlaps. So if you're at like a tiny 20-person company, you'll be all three of them, whether you want to be or not. But I think there's a lot of natural overlap between like product manager and designer and product manager and researcher. And then of course, like lots of designers do research. So if you are having that feeling, it's just going to be about tools, and we're going to go through your first homework assignment. So what is interaction design, or IXD as it's often abbreviated? In life, sometimes things are hard to define. And you know how humans are. We all get talking and we all have language, and then the language starts to change depending on context, and people have different definitions in their minds, and sometimes we never really align on what the underlying definition is for something. So what is social media? Like what apps? We could probably agree on a few, right? But then there are some things that start to blur the lines. And then the exact definition of like what is social media starts to get a little bit fuzzy. This is true for UX, user experience. So I have the main most common categories here, but the pre-read, I think that I supplied you in the email that I sent, it's also on Canvas. Completely optional to read that. But if you're feeling lost, good idea to just skim through that thing. It's meant for like some like kind of professional audiences, not scientific literature or anything. So it should be a pretty quick read, an easy skim if you want to visit that for more on the definition of interaction design. But the idea is UX design is typically, the history of UX design came from a guy named Donald Norman who worked for Apple clear back in like 1997. And he came up with this term user experience design or user experience. And the idea was whether I'm on my phone or my desktop, whether I'm in an app or on the website version of whatever it is, all of this is my experience. So I have a weather app on my phone, but I may also get the weather from the web, and my weather experience can differ depending on what modality I'm on. But all of these things need to be thought through when we're designing a digital experience. So that's how UX was born, is we need the human at the center of all of this, not the technology, but the human problem, the human need needs to be at the heart of all of this. And we're designing these tools and avenues and channels to meet this human need. So user experience is kind of the umbrella term. And within user experience design, there are these other terms. So interaction design is behaviors. It's how something behaves when a person supplies an input. So every form field you fill out, every time you type in the chat here, every button you click, these are interactions. It's when the human and the digital collide. It's that moment. And all of these need to be considered, not just how, as in, is it going to be a swipe or a tap or a double tap or a long press, or what that behavior from the human is going to be, but what is the behavior that's going to happen from the system? And how do we make sure that the person's expectations align with what the system does? That's interaction design. And the reason it's separate or a special subcomponent of UX design is because when you start calling people designers, everyone starts to think it's because they make things pretty. It's because they're focused on aesthetics. And aesthetics are very important. I don't want to downplay that at all. Aesthetics are very, very important. And they actually contribute to our expectations as people that we have for different things. You arrive on a website, it's ugly, it's less trustworthy, it's less likable. You perceive it as less user-friendly right out of the gate, even before you've touched anything, if it's really ugly or looks outdated. So aesthetics really matter. And when it comes to aesthetics, you'll often hear the phrase visual design. Sometimes you'll hear UI versus UX, user interface versus user experience. But really what these terms are referring to is there's the look and feel of something, and then there's the way it behaves. Behaviors are interaction design, and the look and feel is more of the visual design. Some of you have also maybe seen this analogy where you can think of a skeleton, then the skin. So the skeleton is like the UX, the skin is the UI, and that determines all the aesthetics. And then how the body moves around, what dance it does, is the interaction. I don't love that analogy. It kind of breaks down an interaction, because I might even say like muscles are the interaction. I'm not sure. But I think the difference between like skeleton versus the exterior, like skin or clothes or what have you, that's a good distinction between UX and UI. Product design is an old term turned new term that encompasses both UX and UI. And it usually, the reason why people prefer product design is because the original UX was, you're going to think about this entire experience, end to end, front to back, the whole thing. And these days, especially at larger organizations, you're not thinking about the whole thing. You're thinking about just one piece of it. So folks are enjoying saying product design because it limits your scope. It means you don't have to think about like the ad someone sees on social media that they clicked on to then get to the landing page of the website to then make a purchase on the next page. So you're not thinking about the entire experience. You're just thinking about the product or whatever product means. But one key feature of product design is they do want you to have interaction design capabilities. So be really good at the behaviors, be really good at the skeleton, but they also want you to have some look and feel visual design skills. So kind of a messy thing, lots of visualizations like that, like this one that you'll find in the world, and these will make more and more sense the more real world contexts you come across. On the research side, we have similar categories. So we have usability, we have accessibility and inclusion, and then we have strategic or foundational. And I'll zoom into some of those later, but from the design perspective, I want you to be thinking a little bit, your book will help you do this, but I want you to be thinking about like, what's the difference between like the skeleton and the look and feel, the aesthetics? Where does the button go? Is the button blue or green? And I threw this one in here just because people have been trying to map this space for years and it's just hilarious. I mean, it's changing all the time. No one can agree on anything. You notice this is copyright 2009, folks. Oh my gosh. So the reason I'm throwing this in here is because it is okay to ask. You do not need to have the same definition of interaction design as somebody else, and you probably don't. So if you're uncertain of something in an interview, in the workplace, in class, let's talk about it, because these definitions shift depending on context, and it doesn't make you look like you don't know what you're talking about to ask questions about the fundamentals here, because it's really messy. One thing we can agree on for this class is that this is the interaction process. So when we're thinking about interaction design, we're thinking about the user or the person using the experience. What do they sense? What do they perceive? What do they expect? How do they behave? What's the feedback? And then how do they learn? And that's the interaction process that we're going to be hitting on. So we'll talk about like you sense and perceive, you see the button. It's a blue square. You perceive it as clickable because squares, rectangles, and things are often buttons, and this has a little bit of a drop shadow, so you know that it's a button. You expect when you hit the button, it's going to do something. Then you click the button, then it does whatever it actually does, whether that meets your expectations or not, and then you learn based on that interaction. So this is the way you can kind of think about interaction design, is making sure that what I'm perceiving as a user and the expectations that are forming in my mind causes a certain behavior. The feedback aligns with my expectations, and then I learn where I need to learn whenever you break my expectations. Questions or thoughts on this? Kind of fun to think through. For those of you who haven't taken a UX course yet, this is going to change the way you perceive like every single digital thing you come across. You're going to be that friend that like the friend who's really into film, and then you watch any film with that friend and it's like, did you see how the cinematography and the camera pan and it's like, no, I didn't see that. You're going to be that friend only for mobile apps and websites and every interface. So once you see behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. And this is a lot of fun to think about because it's fundamentally like human psychology, right? It's behavior and it's thinking, it's cognition, and then it's also manifesting in every area of our lives. Okay, well, that was just me venting some excited energy. On the research side of things, so we're going to go through this interaction design half of the course. Then we're going to hit usability testing. And for those of you who have taken a research course with me before, you're going to see a couple of things that are new. The first thing is, in the world, there are different types of user research. And I put these three, I put these three down here: usability, accessibility, and inclusion, strategic and foundational, as like these general buckets things can fall into. But there are so many more nuances here. I think the big questions are, when it comes to strategic and foundational, like, what is the problem and who is the person who's experiencing the problem? These really fundamental first diamond questions. Usability is, given this solution, can people use it? Or if I need to design a solution, how can I design it so that people can use it? People can access the value you're supplying them. Accessibility and inclusion is more about who can use it, who can access the value. Can everyone access the value? Should everyone access the value? So in academia, if you have a psych background or a research background, you're trained to think like this. We talk to you about qualitative and quantitative, which is the type of data. Is it words or is it numbers? Qualitative and quantitative. And then we talk to you about behavioral and attitudinal. So like what people do, what you can observe, and then what people say, what people self-report, how people think. And then you'll see a bunch of methods. You'll see like user interviews or focus groups, right? And you'll see methods mapped to essentially these two axes. If you've taken a course with me in UX before, this is probably a good depiction of your mental model of UX research right now. I want to add a layer to this because it's a very academic approach, and in the workplace, everything is more like this. So you have generative research, and then you have evaluative research. And no matter which one you're in, you can have quant or qual data, and you could have any method you could ever imagine. Survey, interview, focus group, some kind of unmoderated behavioral experiment. All of these can be either generative or evaluative, but there are some methods that tend to hang out in one and tend to hang out in the other. Generative, you are trying to gain a deeper understanding. You are trying to generate information about the context, understand user needs, behaviors, and motivations. And this usually happens in the beginning of a project. Evaluative is collecting data to then decide, did we meet our goal? Are we achieving success? Does it work? You're evaluating the solution. And just to add confusion, lots of people use lots of terms to mean this spectrum. So there's more generative stuff and there's more evaluative stuff. And you'll hear words like generative, foundational, discovery research, formative research. You'll hear all of these terms. And then you'll hear evaluative or tactical or solution. Or I crossed out validation because it's used really, really frequently, but it's a term I don't like. I like evaluate, not validate. Yeah, and the three of you just totally saw why. We don't validate solutions, we evaluate solutions. Yeah, you'll get opinions about this if you don't already have them. But generally speaking, what should we do? How should we do it? Build the right thing, build the thing right. And people are going to use all these words to be the blue one and all these words to be the green one, but it's going to be like, what should we do? How should we do it? And in this class, most of the questions are going to be build the right thing. Build the thing right. How should we do it? The green space. And if this is looking like double diamond-y, it's totally because it is. Okay, so that's kind of high level definitions and such. You can reference these slides. We'll keep coming back to these concepts, and these concepts will also be present in your reading. So if this is still kind of you could do the pre-reading that I suggested. You can hang in there. You can start chipping away at the pre-reading, or you can Google some stuff. Have a conversation with ChatGPT, something like that. Okay, any like burning thoughts or questions here? Okay, tools. In this class, we're using a tool called Figma. Figma is the #1 digital design tool in the industry. So probably in the world. Figma's huge and everybody uses it right now. So that's what we use. There's a steep learning curve, but I've already shared with you some introductory tutorials, and I don't expect you to become a Figma wizard in this course. I'm just trying to get you familiar with this standard tool. So I make you do things in Figma, and that's how that is. But I wanted you to know there are other tools out there, and here are some of them that are really common. You'll see these on job descriptions and stuff. Figma is the big one, and we're going to create most of our stuff, like your final project and things like that, in Figma. Because Figma is the industry standard, there are millions of resources on Figma. There are so many YouTube videos. Figma itself has this nice laid out like knowledge community. You can find just about everything you want to find on the Figma website, but if that format isn't like working great for you, find a YouTuber whose personality you gel with and just watch a few videos. Let's look at the description really quickly together. One thing I share with you is like a portfolio is meant to convey two things. You're competent and you're likable. You can do the job and I want to do the job with you. That's my philosophy. Take it or leave it. But hiring managers often come at this as show me you're capable and show me I want to work with you. And I think that it's a tricky balance because there's actually like a little bit of a dichotomy here where the more competent you seem, sometimes the less likable you seem. And the more likable you seem, sometimes the less competent you seem. So there's this balancing act. And we have this like fundamental bias as humans to kind of put people in one category or the other, but you really want to strike the balance between the two. Like I said, you can do either that very brief tagline and one sentence summary at the top of the page, or you can create an about me page from scratch that's like, hi, I'm Dani Green. I've done this for 10 years and I specialize in this and that. And I love education and I also have video, but you know, it's a double-edged sword. When in doubt, go minimalist. Looks more professional. Work with a chatbot to get that tagline really succinct, and don't go too personal. Stick to the journey that is relevant to your work experience, but I don't mind a good story either. And see week 1 slides, for example. Does anyone have any questions on the assignment here?
I have a question. If you feel like you score,
she's a consultant. So you can get creative with what that tagline means, but it just should kind of encapsulate your professional strengths, like what you bring to the table that's unique. And then in your kind of explanatory sentence or paragraphs, you can talk about the kinds of tasks that really light you up or the industries that really light you up. And that will satisfy the what kind of work are you looking for me. This is a good segue into the lecture. So if you recall last time, we were talking about a double diamond, and we even kind of elevated our thinking to something a little bit less linear, a little bit more cyclical, a little bit more iterative. But going back to the simple double diamond, we have the problem space and we have the solution space. So what are we trying to solve in the world? What problems exist? What value can we deliver? And then how are we going to deliver that value? What are we going to build to serve the needs of people? So you see how some of the problems you just generated with dinner map to each of these spaces and kind of follow this spectrum of big problem space, like people don't want it. People like going to the grocery store. People don't want to make food. They want food to arrive. Those product market fit level things. But then you also talked about things like, I couldn't use the app. I couldn't find dinner in search. Maybe I couldn't view all the recipes very easily, or I couldn't filter them by my dietary restrictions. Really tactical problems. And both of these things can honestly, all these spectrum, across the spectrum, all of these problems can take down a product, take down a feature, take down a business. So all of them are really important areas to address. So we've got this high altitude of like the problem space, but if we zoom into the solution space, so let's imagine that they had product market fit. They were advertising and marketing. They paid Google a lot of money to put their search on top. They had a lot of funds to begin with. Let's imagine all of those all those boxes were checked. As we start to get more tactical, you'll find that we start to think more about the actual solution and the usability and other UX factors in that solution. And that's where I want you to absorb the UX honeycomb. So if you haven't seen this one before, these are factors in a user experience that need to be satisfied for something to really be successful. So we talk a lot about, in the problem space, we talk a lot about like, it's valuable. Someone would pay money for the service that you're providing. But there are some of these other factors as well. It needs to be useful. It needs to be desirable. People need to want to engage with this service. Sometimes desirability, anything that conflicts with a person's identity or value set. So when we started talking about like packaging, even if that service seems good, it becomes undesirable because it doesn't align with people's values. Or sometimes there's like a solution out in the world, like an app to help you, but maybe you don't want to admit that you need that kind of help. Can you maybe, I don't know, if you can think of examples, drop them in the chat, but something where people are kind of embarrassed that they use that service or they use that product. That desirability factor, that's a huge thing to overcome as a business. It needs to be accessible to a wide variety of people or the people you're targeting, whoever they are. They need to be able to get to it, to access it, to use it in the way that their environment or context or ability level allows. It also needs to be credible, trustworthy. So it very well could be that you download the dinner app and it looks kind of 1998 and it's just sketchy. It's not credible. It looks like a scam. Maybe the website where you sign up for the service originally kind of looks scammy. Have you ever clicked on an ad or tried to like found a product very interesting? I'm just going to think like social media ads is really common, right? Like you click on a product that looks really interesting. The last Instagram purchase I made was this like steampunk, think Lego kit, but with nuts and bolts and like metal and light bulbs and stuff. So Lego kit that takes a long time. And it was like this steampunk spider. Okay, I'm getting really specific, but like I wanted that thing for someone in my life, needed to build that thing. So I clicked on it and the website looked okay. It was a little clunky, so I had to sit there and dig and make sure that that business was credible and not just gonna take my money. It all worked out. I'll have to send pics of the spider. But if you find something you like and it doesn't seem credible, that can undermine your entire experience. It doesn't matter if there's product market fit if something isn't credible. Findable, we talked a little bit about that. I can find dinner when I'm Googling it. Even within the experience, I can find the recipes I'm looking for. I can find the buttons to check out. And then in UX, we talk a lot about usability. And this whole class, half the title is usability testing. So you can actually use the app. It's intuitive. So all of these boxes need to be checked. And in this case, hexes. All of these hexes need to be checked for this to be a successful venture, whether it's a feature, an app, a physical product, a digital experience, piece of software, an entire service, omni-channel experience with a website and an app and some hardware and everything in between, right? All of these boxes need to be checked. I wanted to tell you about the UX honeycomb because I can't tell you how often I reference this in terms of I'm coming into a new project. Some of you who work in my lab, you're going to be entering into some new landscape and you need to start assessing, what are they asking you to evaluate? Are they asking you to evaluate whether something's usable, desirable, credible, all of the above, valuable? So think about these when you're putting on your science hat and you're really thinking about like, what am I measuring? What is the success outcome that I'm trying to optimize? Thoughts, comments, questions on the UX honeycomb? Anyone seen this before or some version of it? Like 2 of you, I'm honored. Ta-da, UX honeycomb. Isn't this nice? Yeah, just like print this sucker out, right? Or like list it somewhere and reference it. So usability, we're going to zoom in on the next slide. We were thinking about like double diamond, and now we're UX honeycomb, and now I'm going to zoom into usability. But I want you to remember that usability is just one hex in honeycomb. And I also like this. This is from, I believe this is from the Lean Product Playbook by Dan Olson, but I could be misattributing this. But the idea is utility plus usability equals usefulness. Utility being like the functionality. So how it functions and whether you can use that function is usefulness. So I kind of like that too. Zooming into usability a little bit here. So for something to be usable, we can get even more granular. We can take a magnifying glass to this construct. And again, like kind of putting your science hat on, how do we measure usability? What does usability mean? What does it mean when something isn't usable? So breaking this down a little bit, we have things like effectiveness. Can I complete my goal with a high level of accuracy? I try to do a thing and I do it and it's pretty accurate. Is it efficient? Can I do it fast? Sometimes things are usable, but they're not fast. And the user, the human's tolerance for speed, they drop off before they can actually complete whatever goal. Engagement. Is it pleasant? Is it gratifying? Do I want to be using it? Error tolerance is another factor. So am I capable of making a catastrophic error as a user that I can't recover from? If you've ever been on a website and you're filling out some kind of form, and maybe let's just say it asks for your birthday and there's a text field and you enter in your birthday, and then you click submit, and then it's like error, your birthday is not in the right format. And it's like, why did you let me put it in that way then? Like, how come you're not helping me? If you wanted it in a particular format, why didn't you give me some kind of clue that I needed to be putting it in that format? Or the worst, right? A form tells you error or like cannot submit, and it doesn't tell you why. It's the worst. So that tolerance for error and that error recovery, when I do make an error, you need to make it really easy for me to get back to where I belong. Oh, ones that don't save your input. Yes, preach, Serena. Yeah. So I have to, I don't know, I leave the tab open and then I come back and everything's gone. It's like, you should be accounting for that. The system should be helping the user not make that catastrophic error. And finally, is it easy to learn? Many of you will find Figma is not very easy to learn, or you'll find other tools in the world are not very easy to learn. Sometimes we have to learn certain apps or software. We're kind of a captive audience, right? So if I'm using a tool for my job, I'm thinking about like Workday and other things you all might have to use for to like input your hours or something. And if the tool sucks, you're just a captive audience. You have to just learn it because it's for your job. But as consumers, sometimes we don't have to. Like if I'm not doing my taxes or something that I have to complete, if it was just like, am I gonna purchase that steampunk spider buildy kit? Am I? If that was a difficult thing to learn, then I'm out, right? Like I have no tolerance for learning in that environment. I should just click, add to cart, check out, enter by payment information and be done. So I wanted to put this bug in your brain, plant a little seed. Usability will come up more and more, but it's such a fundamental pillar of UX. And oftentimes user experience research is conflated with just usability testing. Some UX researchers only do usability testing. But remember, we have the whole honeycomb. Wow, remember all of it right now. But we have the honeycomb, so there are other things besides usability. You should always be pushing, like, do you want me to test whether that's usable? Do you want me to test whether that's useful or valuable? Nick, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I just had a question in terms of so is this like this would be a part of like the experimental aspect of it? Oh, okay. All right, cool.
That's right.
Because I have a big interest in experimental psychology. So like this is the whole thing. Okay. All right, got it.
Exactly. So we designed something, and that's what y'all are going to do. The first half of this course, you're going to be in design world, but then we're going to evaluate those designs with research findings in an experimental fashion. And these are the underlying constructs that we're going to be tapping into, especially usability. Other thoughts or comments? My last thought for you is kind of a like I don't know, a moment where you're all going to get into your career, whatever that career is. And if you work for something like a tech company, but even like a nonprofit organizations, if you're working on digital experiences at all, you're going to find that the world has trained you to think in this way. You're going to discover the problem, and then you're going to create the solution to solve the problem. So this is like the happy path in our mind. I find out that people want a meal delivery service, same day delivery of groceries so they can complete a recipe. I create the app and it solves the problem. But on the ground, boots on the ground, day to day, go to work, do a project, add a feature, redesign a button, it looks a lot more like this. So each arrow here kind of represents a feature, a design change, some project that the business is pursuing. Maybe they want an additional app, or maybe they want to build some other new product, right? And each of these arrows takes a certain amount of time and energy and resources. For the business to be successful, the average of all these arrows just needs to kind of get to solve the user problem, the average of all the arrows. But on the day-to-day, you're going to find arrows like this one, or you're going to find arrows like this one, where you do an entire project and it doesn't actually move the business toward solving the user's problem. And I just tell you that now because as you're exploring like your final project, this might come up, but really out there in the greater world, you're going to have to figure out ways of weathering the storm a little bit and focusing on this longer arc of year over year, are we getting closer to solving the problem? Because this week or next week or this month, you might actually be here. And that's going to feel real, the mantra of fail faster. Like just kind of get to the next arrow. Because if you walk backwards, it's like, okay, well, then we walked backwards for that arrow. On to the next arrow. Hopefully that arrow is really going to cancel out. The average of the two is going to look pretty good. Okay, last thought, and then I'll let you on a break. As a researcher, not that fast. As a researcher, your role is just to mitigate risk. So your role is just to reduce the number of arrows that are pointing in the wrong direction. But sometimes there's going to be noise. There are going to be arrows that point not quite in the right direction. So I'm just kind of handing you that nugget here. As a designer, your goal is to try to produce things, again, arrows pointing towards solving that problem, which inevitably makes the business successful. But you won't win them all, and that's okay. The system is built for some of those arrows to be in reverse. And from the Interaction Design Foundation, that PDF I sent out, and it's linked in Canvas, it talks a little bit about design thinking as a way to solve problems. And design thinking was actually kind of pioneered back in the late 1960s by a cognitive psychologist. And after that, lots of people kind of jumped on this vague skeleton of a framework that this cognitive scientist, Herbert Simon, put forward. And it really became popular when David Kelly started calling things design thinking with these steps in the late 90s and early 2000s. David Kelly is like, well, he was the founder of the big design firm IDEO, and he also taught at Stanford's D School, design school. So he was a big kind of influencer as UX was evolving in the late 90s and early 2000s. So lots of people like follow David Kelly, just like they follow Don Norman and Jacob Nelson. And these are old pillar people in the field. So David Kelly puts forward design thinking as it's defined here, which is to solve problems, we take these steps. And this is the creative problem solution space. So we empathize to actually understand the user, and we need to shift from self-referential thinking. All of you with psychology backgrounds are going to enjoy the discomfort that this process brings. It's not about you, it's about someone else and someone else's version of truth. So whatever that truth is, the user and their experience is the center of this design process. Then we need to define the assumptions, define the problem, and actually challenge the assumptions we have about the problem as it exists. So sometimes we know that there's a problem in the world. People who are allergic to cats can't cuddle cats. Big problem in the world. But we need to challenge our assumptions about that problem. Does everyone who's allergic to cats want to cuddle cats? Or are we just making that assumption? We could go on and on, but we really need to like break out of our thinking about how we conceive the problem. We then ideate. I say then, but this really isn't a linear process. These are kind of modes you're in when you're design thinking. So ideate is a mode. You want to identify alternative solutions or approaches that might not otherwise be apparent. So one way to solve this allergic to cats but want to cuddle a cat problem is to actually genetically modify my DNA so that I'm not allergic to cats. That's an out-of-the-box solution, right? No one was maybe thinking about that as a first pass solution. But when we ideate, we want to generate lots of different solutions. And this is how we break out of the type of thinking that we had previously been tied to based on what exists today. The classic example of this is Uber and Lyft and how they disrupted the entire transportation industry. When these types of rideshare services came on the market, people laughed. Investors laughed. You're going to have people get in strangers' cars and strangers are going to drive strangers around. Hilarious, but it worked. So these kind of sometimes wild ideation, out of the box thinking can be the right solution. Then we want to prototype. So prototyping is about spending as little energy as you can to generate a solution, to figure out whether it's going to work or not work, good or bad, usable, not usable, desirable or not. So it's not about making this beautiful conceptual thing. It's more about what's the minimum you can create to say, okay, yes, this is going to work or this isn't going to work. And alongside prototype, we test. So evaluating those prototypes with experimentation. And these are the different hats you wear as you're doing this design thinking process. In the pre-read that I offered to you, the Interaction Design Foundation talks about design thinking as the opposite of the scientific method. So in the scientific method, we talk about systematically moving through collecting empirical data, developing a hypothesis, designing a test to evaluate that hypothesis and drawing a conclusion. And the whole idea is cause and effect relationships. So we want to get as close to causal as we can as we're testing things. And one of the reasons why design thinking took off is because design thinking helps us solve more complex problems that have unknown unknowns. So we don't know what we don't know out there about the problem. And we need to explore the problem to figure those things out. Whereas the scientific method is really good about taking, okay, we don't know this thing. It's really clear what we don't know. And then we're going to systematically test that in a linear fashion. It will come as no surprise to most of you who know me that I don't like this dichotomy whatsoever. Both of these frameworks belong in UX and should be leveraged alongside each other. And you can't really just do one and have a good, reliably good result. I also kind of think about it like this. I don't know if you see what I did here, but I just kind of like in each mode of design thinking, you can get really experimental with the scientific method. In each stage of the scientific method, you can put on your design thinking hat. So I just don't see them as this or that, black or white. I see this as like one of 100 frameworks that are out there that you're going to use in different contexts and flexibly apply different principles from. So just my 2 cents. But these are 2 paradigms we're going to be using to solve problems in this class. So I wanted you to be really familiar with design thinking, and then most of you are pretty familiar with the scientific method. So we'll be doing both. And I'll remind you, our big questions for this course, what we're trying to solve here together is applying scientific method, applying design thinking to design with research, inform our designs with research, and then put on our researcher hat and do research that can actually positively impact designs. So this is how this all comes together. Okay, so that's kind of that topic. I'm glad some folks are agreeing with me in the chat. Feels validating, but you don't have to agree with me either. Seek out other perspectives, of course, as always. Let's think about some design examples. So in the chapter you read, you started getting your leveraging of mental models are these. So first, the shopping cart. The shopping cart icon comes from a physical shopping cart, right? And we know that we put things in the cart and that's how we take it to pay for it. And that translated to an online setting. And now we all associate a shopping cart icon with put things in there and then check out and pay for them. The save icon, for those of you who have interacted with 3.5-inch floppy disks, the save icon was a physical thing that you, like a physical disk that you put things on. And that's why we have the save icon we do. But there are some things that don't have necessarily physical analogies, but that are so entrenched in you from your learning of digital worlds that you don't even really know that they're mental shortcuts until I explain. So for example, if you see a circular button versus if you see a square button, you know, if you see a whole bunch of circular buttons that you can only select one of them. And if you see a bunch of square buttons, you can select multiple. This is a way the digital space has trained you. You also know that if you see a toggle switch, there are two modes, on and off, enabled, disabled, and you're toggling between the two. So you have this is sort of a physical analogy too. We have switches and such, but you kind of have this pattern in your head from interacting with digital experiences. More abstract, you have these patterns in your head, especially hamburger and kebab or meatballs. So if you didn't know, that's what these are called: the hamburger menu, the kebab menu, and the meatballs menu. We are very clever in tech. So the hamburger menu was designed when we were translating things from desktop to mobile for the first time, and we realized we had very limited space and everything has a menu. So the hamburger menu was born and everyone learned it, and it was a widely adopted pattern, design pattern that everyone just sort of learned, adopted, and now is used today. Every time you see these three lines, especially if they're somewhere like up in a corner, you're going to think that there's a menu under there. So that's one thing. Kebab and meatballs, similar thing. You see these buttons next to things a lot, and you know there's more stuff in there. So these are patterns, and there's so many patterns, common patterns that you have learned throughout your life interacting with digital experiences that should be leveraged in a lot of contexts. Why reinvent the wheel? Let's not replace the hamburger menu with a star, because most people aren't going to know that a star up in the corner is a menu. They're not going to click on it expecting a menu to pop out. They might actually click it expecting that I'm going to favorite something or save something to a wish list, right? That's kind of the pattern we have for stars and hearts. And they're either full or not full. So you break a pattern, you're going to lose these mental models. You're going to lose these mental shortcuts. So in design, we're often trying to find ways to take mental models and leverage them for intuitive design. Everyone's starving for kebabs and meatballs and hamburgers now. So our activity here is there's a time to break the rules. And let's focus on the hamburger menu. Whoops, wow. I'm just not scrolling today. Let's focus on the hamburger menu. I want you to come up with examples of when you might choose to use the person or toggles. This is what a drop-down menu looks like. And I've just listed some really well-known design systems that are publicly available. I've listed them here on this slide and also in the assignment description. So like, here's a website and this is Google's material design. This is their design system. And you can read a little bit about it and such, but when you look at the components, it's like, okay, this is what a button looks like. All the different types of buttons. This is how Google does buttons. And lots of companies adopt these publicly available design systems. So lots of companies do buttons this way.